Imagine you're a track marshal. A driver has just crashed and you go to help him. But this happens to you. The driver greets you with a hit that almost knocks you out, when all you wanted was to help. It may seem extreme, but as you saw, this happened and wasn't an isolated case. There are also the two teammates who were involved in one of the most embarrassing espionage scandals in the history of the sport, which ended with a $100 million fine for the team. Another driver intentionally crashed into his direct rival in the last race of the season to secure his first world title. There was one who was fined $1 million for racist and homophobic comments, and another who had a romantic relationship with a minor, while he paid women to pretend to have a perfect life in front of the cameras. But they all have something in common. They weren't just any drivers. They were all world champions, and together they have more than 25 world championships. This ranks scandals, betrayals, fights, and decisions that change the sport, not talent. These are the 15 most controversial drivers in the history of Formula One. And stay until the end, because the first place, he was found having sex in his team's garage, right before racing in the event that would decide his world championship. And still, that wasn't his worst act. Throughout his career, Esteban Ocon crashed into world champions and fought with all his teammates.
What happened today is completely unacceptable for the team.
And he achieved something almost impossible: to get kicked out of a team for being too much trouble. From his first season at Force India, it was clear he would be a difficult driver.
He can't move at the last moment. It's very dangerous.
And his first big battle was with Sergio Checo Perez. In Canada, 2017. Checo didn't let him pass when the Frenchman had a better pace. And a week later in Baku, Ocon tried to overtake Perez on the inside, and the following happened. The crash left the Mexican's car without a front wing.
What did Esteban do?
Ocon managed to finish the race despite a puncture for the Frenchman, but Checo had to retire and shared his thoughts afterward.
I've never had a teammate like that. I've had very aggressive teammates, but not like that, ruining the team's race. That had never happened to me before.
And this was just the beginning of one of the most toxic internal rivalries of the decade. But it didn't end there. They also had incidents in Hungary, Belgium, and Singapore. So the relationship ended up broken. Most concerning is that this wasn't an isolated case. In 2018 in Brazil, he was involved in one of the most absurd maneuvers of the season. Verstappen was comfortably leading, and Ocon, who was a lap behind, tried to unlap himself with a very risky move and crashed into him.
What a damn idiot.
Max lost the race, and after the checkered flag, he went to look for him at the weighing area. But we'll talk about that later. And as you can imagine, the fans quickly reacted on social media, and because of all the incidents, they nicknamed him Esteban Chocon. Years later, he was Fernando Alonso's teammate at Alpine, and things stayed the same. At the 2022 Hungarian Grand Prix, Daniel Ricciardo was chasing Alonso, who was behind Ocon, who had just come out of the pits with cold tires. With a slower pace than his teammate, Esteban decided to block Fernando as much as he could. And when they reached turn 2, both teammates were overtaken by the Australian driver. A disaster for the team. Months later, at the sprint race in Brazil, Alonso used Ocon's slipstream to overtake him. But the Frenchman made a late and dangerous move that broke the Spaniard's front wing. He didn't stay quiet and was quite vocal against his teammate. Lost the front wing, thanks to our friend. After this, Alonso had to pit and drop to last place, so his race was ruined. A year later, Pierre Gasly and the French team, and the story repeated itself. They had already had problems since the lower categories, and at Alpine, everything exploded. In Australia 2023, they cornered each other and ended up crashing into the wall. A year later, in Monaco 2024, Ocon tried to overtake him before the tunnel and ended up flying through the air over his teammate.
What did he do? What did he do? Why did he try to attack me?
The team boss called it unacceptable, warned of consequences, and weeks later, Alpine confirmed this. Ocon wouldn't continue in 2025, not due to his speed, but because he was too problematic. 3 teams, 3 teammates, same pattern. Esteban Ocon doesn't need enemies. He turns every garage he enters into a war zone. But this is just the beginning, because every position after this gets worse. He didn't get any wins, but with just one race, he ruined a world championship and became the most hated man in Spain. Vitaly Petrov was the first Russian driver to reach Formula 1, coming from being runner-up in Grand Prix. 2. But his move to Renault was mainly due to Russian government and Putin's support rather than his results. His debut season in 2010 went unnoticed until the last race arrived, and with it, his legacy. In Abu Dhabi, Fernando Alonso said he was leading the championship, only needed 5th place to win, and had qualified 3rd. Everything seemed perfect except for 2 problems: Ferrari's strategy and Petrov. The team decided to cover Webber, another direct rival, but because of that decision, Alonso got stuck in traffic. Petrov, who was in 6th place, was the first of them, and that's how the nightmare began. The Russian had nothing at stake, yet defended his position as if his life depended on it, lap after lap, without mistakes and without giving in. And while Alonso grew more and more desperate, Petrov held his position without any pressure. I spent over 40 laps unable to pass him. Finally, Alonso crossed the finish line in 7th place, and with Vettel's victory, the German was crowned world champion. Red Bull's celebration was complete, with even the mechanics thanking the Russian for keeping Alonso behind. On the other hand, at Ferrari, everyone was furious, especially Fernando Alonso, who exploded. On the way back to the pits, he made all kinds of gestures from the car, reproaching him for what had happened. In response to this, Petrov defended himself in the following way.
I came here to fight and don't want anyone to pass because I want to prove I'm Russian and can fight.
And it was true, but in Spain, they didn't forgive him. They made him the villain and blamed him for losing the title. Years later, his name resurfaced, but due to his off-track remarks. In 2020, he was criticized for homophobic comments and for attacking the We Race as One campaign. That same year, he was going to be a steward in Portugal, but the controversy, along with his father's murder, forced him to resign. But there was still more. He was one of the main critics of Hamilton's activism in support of Black Lives Matter. And even though he was already retired, every time he spoke, he started a new controversy. He is one of the greatest talents in history, but for years he was more feared than respected. The Dutchman debuted at 17, and in just 1 year he had already made history and enemies. His first major victim was Daniil Kvyat. Red Bull demoted the Russian from Toro Rosso after just 4 races and put Max in his place.
I think those around us will also judge how well we can do the job in these circumstances.
The most shocking part came next. Verstappen ended up being in a relationship with Kelly Piquet, Kvyat's ex-girlfriend, and as if that wasn't enough, he raised the daughter that Daniil had with her. He not only took his seat on the team, but also ended up with his family. It was a public humiliation and a career start marked by both talent and controversies. On the other hand, from his very first Grand Prix races, Max overtook where no one else dared, defended the limit, and never asked for permission for anything. At Spa 2016, after a bad start, he dove inside at the first corner, forcing both Ferraris to go wide. And he said this:
"Are you satisfied with your driving in defense?"
They would have penalized me if it wasn't correct, so I think everything was fair today.
He not only crashed into them, but also blamed them. Later on in the same race, he defended so aggressively against Raikkonen that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had to step in. Drivers like Raikkonen, Vettel, and Ricciardo accused him of being dangerous. Because of this, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile implemented a rule that banned changing direction while braking. A rule tailor-made for Verstappen that was implemented right after his dangerous maneuvers at Spa-Francorchamps. However, his aggressiveness was not limited to the track. In Brazil 2018, he was comfortably leading the race until Esteban Ocon, a lapped driver, tried to unlap himself aggressively and crashed into him. Max lost the race in his patience.
What an idiot. I don't know what to say, and I hope I don't see him in the work area because he's an idiot.
After the checkered flag, he went to look for him at the weigh-in, pushed him, and insulted him in front of everyone. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile sanctioned him with community service, but he didn't apologize. In fact, he said he didn't regret anything. Then came the year that changed everything, 2021. The duel with Hamilton was a war. Incidents like those at Silverstone, Monza, and Jeddah made it clear, and the ending was even more controversial. In the final race in Abu Dhabi, Max and Lewis were tied in points, but Hamilton dominated comfortably during the race until a safety car changed everything. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile decided not to apply the regulations as they were written and let only certain lapped cars unlap themselves, restarting the race a lap earlier than expected. This situation directly benefited Verstappen, who was left with new tires right behind Hamilton. And he didn't waste the opportunity. He overtook him on the last lap and became world champion. As Max celebrated, Mercedes struggled with the outcome.
No, Mikey, that wasn't right.
For many, this was deeply unfair and resulted in a coronation surrounded by controversy. Additionally, this victory was also possible thanks to Sergio Perez, who held off Hamilton for several laps and allowed Max to catch up to him. A gesture that Verstappen apparently forgot very quickly. In Brazil 2022, Perez was fighting for the runner-up position. So the team asked Max to give the position back and let him pass. But the champion refused.
Max, let Checo have the position back, please.
I already told you last time, don't ask me again. Are we clear on that? I gave you my reasons.
In response to this, Perez reacted as follows. This reveals his true character. For Verstappen, it wasn't about points or strategies. In his mind, he's always above the rest, and when he races, he makes it clear. Does it make sense for Max to act that way? His personality, his way of competing, his unbreakable character, it all has an origin. Because he wasn't just raised by his father, he was shaped by blows, pressure, and demands from a man who never allowed him to be a child. Although we'll talk about that in a few spots later, but first, if you're enjoying the video, subscribe. He spent just 1 year in Formula One, which was enough to make him the most hated driver on the grid. Mazepin is there due to money, not talent. His father, a Russian oligarch close to Putin, financed his seat at Haas and practically saved the team with a multi-million-dollar sponsorship. But what caused backlash wasn't just his arrival, but his attitude before debuting. He was already in a sexual scandal after posting a video of himself inappropriately touching a woman. Although he deleted it quickly, it was too late. He was about to be expelled for this and not even start his career in Formula One. But in the end, they let him race. However, on the track, things got worse during his debut in Bahrain on the first lap, after just 3 corners. It appears to be a Haas, possibly Nikita Mazepin, going off into the barriers at turn 3. Not because of a crash, not because of a problem, he just lost control, a total disaster. After only 20 seconds in Formula One, he was nicknamed Mazepin. And from there, everything just kept getting worse. The Russian gained a reputation for frequent spins and errors in nearly every championship race. But not only that, he was also quite problematic with his teammate Mick Schumacher, even putting him in danger during a backflip.
What was that? Seriously?
But it wasn't just like that with his teammate. He was like that with almost every driver on the grid.
This guy is an idiot.
This is incredible.
It didn't matter if it was practice or a race, there was always an incident, to the point that his own boss said the following.
That's why people hate you.
Despite all this, his place in 2022 seemed to be guaranteed by his father's money. But the invasion of Ukraine changed everything. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile allowed him to continue under a neutral flag, but Haas dropped him from the team. It was the perfect excuse, and Haas took advantage of it. Mazepin publicly criticized the American team for not keeping what they had agreed on. And months later, a court determined that the team could keep part of the money, but had to return the rest. That's how his story ended in the top category. 1 season, 0 points. And a legacy based not on speed, but on everything you shouldn't do as a Formula One driver. Not even all his money was enough to buy him another chance. When people say daddy's boy in Formula One, everyone thinks of him. Lance Stroll entered the category at just 18 years old, and with him came a wallet impossible to ignore. His father, Lawrence Stroll, not only financed his career, but also bought a Formula One team for him to compete in. First Williams and then Racing Point, a team that years later he turned into Aston Martin. But buying teams was nothing new for the Strolls. In lower categories, Lawrence had already done it with Prema, where, thanks to his investment, Lance received preferential treatment over his teammates. He spent more than $300 million on state-of-the-art simulators, illegal parts, exclusive staff, and making sure his son had a direct path to Formula One. And all that for a mediocre driver who never proved to be up to the task. Over the years, he was involved in multiple episodes of irresponsibility on the track and had incidents with Max Verstappen.
Is this guy blind? What's his problem?
Sebastian Vettel.
Is this possible? Stroll can't see ahead.
And many more. But the most worrying thing isn't his irresponsibility. It's that he never admits his mistakes. His answers in interviews make it clear.
Alonso said that during the race he wouldn't overtake you, but
the worst so far happened in Qatar, 2023. While Alonso was qualifying without any problem, Stroll was eliminated in Q1. When he got out of the car, he furiously threw his expensive steering wheel as if it was nothing, and seconds later, he violently pushed his physical trainer, blaming him for what had just happened when he only wanted to help. And despite everything, he's still there because no one can fire the boss's son. And not only that, but in an interview, he said the following.
This system is, to keep the guys who don't deserve to be there from buying their way up from the junior series and making it to F1.
He said it himself. The same guy who had everything bought for him even before he debuted. Today, Stroll is one of the most experienced drivers on the grid, but his performance hasn't changed. He has always been behind his teammates. Felipe Massa, Sergio Perez, Sebastian Vettel, Fernando Alonso, one by one, they've all outperformed him. Lance Stroll represents everything that's wrong with the system because in his case, talent was never what opened the doors for him. It was the last name. He won a race in Formula One, but nobody remembers him for that. Pastor Maldonado made it to the top category thanks to the support of the Venezuelan government, because without it, he wouldn't have gotten his seat. Petróleos de Venezuela, Sociedad Anónima, the state oil company, covered a large part of the Williams team's budget. And behind that sponsorship was Hugo Chavez, who needed to build a popular figure to gain support both inside and outside the country. Maldonado was young, Venezuelan, charismatic, and racing against the world's best would make him the ideal symbol. A disguised ambassador as a driver.
We honored Pastor Maldonado, the champion heading to Formula One.
We are winning! But there was a problem. Maldonado kept crashing, and that wasn't something new. In Monaco 2005, when he was racing in the Renault World Series, he ignored a double yellow flag and ran over a track marshal, who ended up with multiple fractures. Due to this incident, he was suspended for the year and permanently banned from the Monaco circuit. Although later on that punishment was lifted, so when he got to Formula One, the pattern repeated itself. Spins, crashes, judgment errors, and risky straight maneuvers. Some even began to suspect that some of his crashes weren't accidental, that he caused them to harm others, or simply out of frustration. In 5 seasons, Maldonado was involved in more than 40 incidents. He collided with Lewis Hamilton, Esteban Gutierrez, Sergio Perez, Nico Hülkenberg, Jenson Button, Romain Grosjean, Max Chilton, Charles Pic, Kimi Räikkönen, and more. Hamilton was clearly his favorite victim. In Belgium, he hit him on the straight. In Valencia, he took him out of the race, and in Monaco, he sent him into the wall. Amazingly, amid all that, he won a race. In Barcelona, 2012. He started from pole position with a Williams that wasn't supposed to win. And the next day, he held off Fernando Alonso for over 60 laps and did the unthinkable.
The Formula One winner is Pastor Maldonado.
An unexpected, unrepeatable saga. After Williams, he moved to Lotus, where Petróleos de Venezuela, S.A., signed a sponsorship contract worth around $45 million. By then, the Venezuelan crisis was already felt. The money stopped coming, and Maldonado's political support vanished. In 2016, he was left out of the category and never returned. That's how the story of the only Venezuelan driver in Formula One ended, with one victory, millions of dollars from the Venezuelan government, and countless controversies. His career was brief, but he was at the center of one of the most embarrassing scandals in the history of Formula One. Nelson Piquet Jr. entered the category with the help of his father, the three-time world champion. In fact, his family founded the Piquet sports team in lower categories with a single goal: to get Nelsonio to Formula One, and they succeeded. He debuted with Renault in 2008 and, after a disappointing first half, unexpectedly reached the podium in Germany. It seemed like he was taking off, but everything collapsed in Singapore because that night, one of the darkest chapters in sports was written. Hours before the race, Piquet was called to a private meeting with Flavio Briatore and Pat Symonds. In that meeting, he was ordered to crash on purpose in a specific area of the circuit to benefit Fernando Alonso and help him get the victory. Piquet had no contract for the next year, and according to his testimony, the pressure was so great that he felt intimidated, manipulated, and without options. He feared that if he didn't obey, they would kick him out of the team. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order under pressure that he accepted because he believed it was the only way to stay in Formula One. So, on lap 14 of the Grand Prix, he followed the orders of Briatore and Symonds, crashed into the wall, and caused a safety car. Alonso, who had already pitted, inherited the lead and eventually won the race. Everything went according to plan and no one suspected anything. However, a year later, in 2019, Nelson Piquet Jr. was fired after the race in Hungary. He did everything he was asked, but they still fired him. Angry about losing his job and backed by his father, he chose to speak out. The Brazilian publicly claimed that the crash had been a direct order from the team, and the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile investigated it. In response, Renault denied everything. Although Briatore and Symonds resigned before the trial, they were ultimately found guilty. And that's how one of the biggest scandals in the history of the sport exploded. Renault received a 2-year suspended ban, Briatore was banned for life, and Symonds was sanctioned for 5 years. Fernando Alonso, according to the official version, didn't know anything and therefore was not sanctioned. Piquet, on the other hand, received immunity for being the one who reported the incident, an immunity once again negotiated with the help of his father. However, within the paddock, not everyone saw him as a victim. Many considered him a traitor because he accepted the order and only spoke up when he was fired. As you've seen, his father was key in this story. But this was just one of all the controversies I was involved in. He was a millionaire driver and for years the last great playboy of Formula One. Eddie Irvine entered the category in the 90s, but he seemed like he was from another era. The era of party-loving, eccentric, and womanizing drivers from the 60s and 70s. Irvine was often a protagonist on the track, but usually for the wrong reasons. In 1993, during his Jordan debut, he met the star of the moment. Ayrton Senna at Suzuka aggressively blocked the Brazilian's McLaren as he tried to unlap himself. Not once, but twice. One of those maneuvers, unnecessarily risky, made Senna lose between 15 and 20 seconds.
Yes, it is. Eddie Irvine has passed Ayrton Senna.
Something totally illogical and irresponsible, especially considering it was done to the leader of the race. Ayrton crossed the finish line angry and went to find him at the motorhome hours later. I'll explain what happened soon. But in short, Senna went in, confronted him, and punched him directly in the face. Years later, Rubens Barrichello said that Irvine was a huge fan of Senna and said the following. He said he was going to tell his grandchildren, "The great Senna himself hit me." But his record didn't end there. In 1994 at Interlagos, he caused one of the most dangerous accidents of the decade. Irvine was battling Jos Verstappen for position when a lapped car showed up. The Irish driver slowly squeezed Verstappen, eventually pushing him off the track. The Dutchman touched the grass and came back out of control. The Benetton flew through the air and landed on Martin Brando's McLaren, hitting his head. It was an incident that could have ended much worse and even had long-term effects on Brando. Due to this, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile gave him a one-race suspension and a $10,000 fine. Jordan appealed, but the penalty was raised to 3 races. Years later, in 2003, he was arrested in London for speeding and reckless driving his Ferrari. If Irvine had a car, problems were inevitable, even when he wasn't driving. In 2014, he was sentenced to 6 months in prison for a fight in a bar in Milan. 6 months for a fight in a bar. Yes, the problem was that he hit the son of the former mayor of the city. And in Italy, you pay a high price for that. Retired, he made several public appearances and interviews calling Jenson Button overrated. He criticized Hamilton and Vettel's attitude and accused the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile of being soft and biased. Even off the track, his statements continued to make headlines. He was also linked with several celebrities, including Pamela Anderson. Irvine was quick, controversial, excessive, and treated Formula One like a non-stop party. The last major playboy in the category, though even with all he did, he still fell short of the sport's greatest playboy. But we'll talk about him in a higher spot in the ranking. In the meantime, if you're enjoying this video, subscribe. If you say Verstappen, everyone thinks of Max, but before him, there was another story, a much darker one. Jos Verstappen, Max's father, went through several teams and left a mark on all of them. Not due to his talent, but his crashes, clumsy moves, and confusing history. He first became known in Germany in 1994 when his car caught fire in the pits after a fuel leak.
Fuel fire, a bit of a problem. Fuel fire.
Horrible.
Incredibly, his most memorable moment was another Brazil 2001. Juan Pablo Montoya was leading the race towards his first victory, while dominating his rivals, including Michael Schumacher. But then Jos appeared, he was a lap behind, tried to unlap himself while braking and crashed straight into Montoya from behind.
Wow, what an incredible turn of events.
The Colombian was out of the race, and Jos Verstappen earned the hatred of all of Colombia. Although this was serious, his biggest scandals occurred off the track. In 2008, he was arrested for assaulting his wife, Sophie Comper, mother of Max Verstappen, and 3 months later, he was sentenced to prison, although he always denied the charges. After a few years, the violence continued. In 2012, he was again arrested after running over his girlfriend with his car during an argument. According to the report, she walked away after a fight and he hit her with the car. And although he was released on bail, the damage was already done, but the scandals didn't end there. In 2017, he was arrested again for assaulting another man in a bar. An argument, a punch, and another stain on his record. And if that's already serious, the worst is yet to come. His relationship with his son Max? For years, Josh shaped him with extreme demands, constant pressure, and punishments that could be considered child abuse. It was brutality. Once, after a race in which Max made a mistake, his father left him abandoned at a gas station. As punishment, Max explained what happened.
He stopped at the gas station and said, "Go, I don't want to talk to you."
What's even more incredible is that Max tells it very naturally, as if it were normal, or as if he were justifying it. But that wasn't all. On another occasion, Josh confessed that he told his son he would break his head if he didn't do what he was told. And in fact, he has actually hit him on some occasions. As he mentions in this interview,
I smacked him, boom, and he was surprised.
Many years after this mistreatment, he admitted that the boy used to cry after many races. It was an upbringing forced by blows, by shouting, by fear, like I said, a brutality. And all with a single goal, for Max to do what his father couldn't. Controversy runs in the family. We've already talked about his children, his son-in-law, and his father-in-law. Now it's time to talk about the origin of it all. Nelson Piquet Zinho, three-time world champion and one of the most controversial figures to have passed through Formula One, both during his time as a driver and many years later, already retired. His first major controversy came with the Brabham team in 1981, when he won the title over Carlos Reutemann with a suspension system that lowered during the race to generate more grip and then raised again so the authorities wouldn't notice. A brilliant trick, but illegal. Although this wasn't the only thing, because with Brabham, he did everything to win. One of the most questioned methods was the use of an additional water tank to cool the brakes. During the race, the liquid would be emptied, which made the car lighter and faster. And at the end, before being weighed by the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, they would refill it with liquid to meet the established minimum weight. For him, anything was fair if it meant winning. But he was even more controversial off the track than on it. During his time at Williams, his relationship with his teammate Nigel Mansell was a disaster. He not only belittled him as a driver, but also publicly mocked his wife's appearance. But in 1988, he went even further. He claimed that Ayrton Senna was homosexual and that he had relationships with his mechanics. However, years later, a court forced him to retract his statements. After 3 years, in 1991, Piquet retired from Formula One, but not from controversies. In 2009, he was a leading defender of his son after the Crashgate scandal. As I mentioned, he took a back seat, because although he was not directly part of the team, he publicly supported Nelsinho's decision, helped him through the process, and was defiant towards the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile and the media. After many years out of the spotlight, in 2022, a new controversy put him back in the headlines. He was sentenced by a Brazilian court to pay almost $1 million in fines for a racist and homophobic comment against Lewis Hamilton. But instead of apologizing, he tried to justify his words by saying that in Brazil, that language was common and not offensive. However, the court did not agree, and the Brazilian had to pay a fine of 5 million reais. Nelson Piquet Sr. was one of the great champions of his generation, but off the track, he left a legacy much harder to admire. 7-time world champion and one of the most successful drivers in history. But on his way to the top, he also accumulated scandals, controversies, and highly debated decisions, both on and off the track. Hamilton arrived in 2007 as Fernando Alonso's teammate at McLaren, and from the very first race, he competed on equal terms with the reigning 2-time world champion. And what seemed like a sporting rivalry turned into an all-out war. The tensions within the team quickly exploded. Hamilton became the favorite of McLaren, the press, and the paddock, while Alonso, sidelined, ended up at odds with his own team. Amid all this, the Spider scandal erupted. McLaren was accused of possessing confidential information from Ferrari, blueprints, technical data, and strategies leaked by an engineer who worked in Maranello. The investigation was very intense. Hamilton, when testifying before the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, provided crucial information that helped confirm the offense. And thanks to his cooperation, he avoided being penalized. But McLaren wasn't as lucky. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile imposed a fine of $100 million on them and excluded them from the Constructors' Championship, one of the harshest penalties in the history of Formula One. Years later, Hamilton faced another internal conflict at Mercedes. He and Nico Rosberg were teammates, but they had known each other since they were kids. They had shared junior categories, hotels, cars, and for a long time, they were best friends. But living together at Mercedes destroyed everything. In 2016, the crash between them at the Spanish Grand Prix was a point of no return. Rosberg won the title that year and retired at the end of the season, saying he couldn't stand the level of pressure and tension anymore. He chose to retire instead of staying as Hamilton's teammate. But this wasn't the last controversy for the Briton on track. In 2019 in Australia, he overtook Giorno Trulli under the safety car. Seeing this, McLaren ordered him to give the position back, and he did. But later, when the stewards asked him if he let the Italian pass, Hamilton deliberately lied and said that Trulli had overtaken him illegally. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile found out the truth and disqualified him from the race. On the other hand, off the track, criticism was also frequent. In 2005, during the podium ceremony at the Chinese Grand Prix, he sprayed champagne in the face of Liu Zijin, a protocol model. Though she minimized it, feminist groups in the United Kingdom and China criticized him harshly. Hamilton had to publicly apologize. 2 years later, at Christmas 2017, he posted a video mocking his nephew for wearing a princess costume.
Boys shouldn't wear princess costumes.
The video sparked a wave of backlash, and once again, Hamilton had to come out and apologize and delete the content. That same year, he was also criticized by PETA after posting photos and stories on his social media petting captive tigers during a vacation in Mexico. The images were taken at the Black Jaguar White Tiger Foundation, an organization that was later reported for animal abuse. A few years later, in 2020, he became the most visible voice of the We Race as One movement within Formula One. He publicly supported Black Lives Matter after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and led workplace protests, with shirts, messages, and gestures during the ceremonies. Though many applauded him, he was also criticized by former drivers, journalists, and executives who wanted sports kept separate from politics. The next year, he faced the biggest battle of his career, Hamilton versus Verstappen. I mentioned this battle when discussing Max, but it was also a turning point for the Brit, with contact, crashes, constant tension, and a season finale that is still being debated today.
This is being manipulated, man.
Lewis Hamilton has won it all, but his story wasn't just full of victories, it was also full of controversies. He was a world champion, he was the idol of an entire country, but he was also at the center of two of the biggest scandals in the history of the sport. Fernando Alonso has had clashes with rivals, teammates, teams, engine suppliers, and even his own bosses, and always without a filter. In 2006, while fighting for the title with Michael Schumacher, Alonso did something unthinkable. He publicly attacked his own team. He claimed that within Renault there were people who didn't want him to win the championship, and that they only cared about the constructor's title. It was a bombshell and a preview of everything that would come afterward. Then, in 2007, he arrived at McLaren and the tension exploded from the very beginning. He shared the team with British rookie Lewis Hamilton, who quickly challenged him. Alonso felt that McLaren was betraying him, that they favored the rookie and wanted him out. The situation became unsustainable in Hungary, where during qualifying he deliberately blocked the Brit, who was now stopped in the pits, so he didn't have time to do another fast lap to fight for first position. The team took first and second in quali with Alonso on pole, but internally it was the worst defeat of the year. That incident was one of the triggers for the scandal that would come later, the Spygate, which I already talked about when I mentioned Hamilton. McLaren was accused of spying on Ferrari, and Alonso ended up handing over emails as evidence, pressured by the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, which threatened to revoke his super license if he didn't cooperate. In 2008, after all this scandal and a conflicted ending with McLaren, he returned to Renault. There, just a year after the Spygate scandal, he was part of the Crashgate that I already talked about in the section about Nelson Piquet Jr. But something I didn't mention is that, according to multiple sources, Alonso knew about the plan. And that's how he won the Singapore Grand Prix, thanks to his teammates' intentional crash. Although he wasn't penalized, his image was forever marked. Then Ferrari arrived, bringing another controversial chapter. That year, team orders were prohibited, but at the 2010 German Grand Prix, the team asked Felipe Massa to let Alonso pass. They tried to cover it up, but it went terribly. And that's where one of the most iconic phrases in the history of the category was born.
Okay, so Fernando is faster than you.
Ferrari was fined $100,000 for this. And going back to the topic of Alonso's statements, these were not only against his teams like Ronaldo McLaren, but also against his rivals. In 2012, while fighting for the championship with Sebastian Vettel, he dropped another explosive statement.
We used to compete with Vettel when we all had similar cars and even led the championship. Now we're up against Adrian Newey, and so far we can't beat him.
At Ferrari, things went badly. And when his time there didn't meet expectations, his frustration grew even more. During the McLaren-Honda era, this partnership led Alonso to add engine manufacturers to his list of victims. In 2015, after several mechanical failures and a disastrous performance, he shouted over the radio with a phrase that became historic.
Engine Grand Prix 2, wow.
A way of saying the Honda engine was so bad it seemed suited for a lower category. That same year, after dropping out of qualifying in Brazil due to another car breakdown, he got out and literally sunbathed against the wall. At Alpine, he was involved in several incidents. With Esteban Ocon, as I mentioned, in the Frenchman's position, they had on-track battles that created tension within the team and ended with the Spaniard leaving the project. Fernando Alonso has been one of the most talented drivers of his generation, but also one of the most controversial and problematic, who was involved in two of the biggest scandals in the history of Formula One. He was a world champion, an idol for an entire country, and an eternal legend of the sport. But not only that, he also had a relationship with a minor. He ended up fighting with a rookie driver and was part of the biggest political scandals Formula One has ever seen. Ayrton Senna was the most admired driver of his generation, and at the same time, one of the most controversial. In Brazil, he dated Adriane Yamin, a family friend's daughter, for years. The issue? He was 24 and she was just 15. They both hid it for a long time, and according to her, later on, they lived under the supervision of both their parents and only had sexual relations when she turned 18. And while this was happening in secret, Senna was facing rumors about his sexuality. Nelson Piquet started publicly saying that Senna was homosexual. To end the rumors, his father hired models to attend events with Ayrton. Although the accusation was false, the controversy grew so much that Piquet was forced to retract his statement in court. Also, on the track, his character was already causing conflicts from the very first years. In 1984, after only a few Formula One races, Senna made history in the rainy Monaco Grand Prix. Starting 13th in a storm, he overtook everyone, including Alain Prost. He passed him on the track, but just seconds before, Jean-Marie Balestre, president of Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile, brought out the red flag. The result was taken based on the order of the previous lap, so Prost kept first place. At that moment, Balestre became his first enemy. In response to this, Senna said the following:
Formula One is political and heavily funded.
Years later, in 1989, Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost were teammates at McLaren. The relationship was tense but respectful until at Imola, Senna broke an internal agreement. They had agreed not to attack each other in the first corner if they were in first and second position, but Senna ignored it and overtook him. Then he justified himself by saying that the agreement didn't apply after a restart. From that moment, the relationship was broken forever. At the end of that year, both arrived at Suzuka to decide the championship. Senna started from pole position and Prost from second place, but on the clean side. So the Frenchman had the advantage and took the lead, after Prost led the entire race. A few laps from the end, Senna tried passing at the chicane, but the Frenchman blocked him and Prost retired. Senna asked marshals for help, rejoined the track, changed the LeBron, and won the race. It seemed like a feat that gave him a chance at the championship, until after the race when Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile disqualified him for cutting the chicane, a decision made directly by Jean-Marie Balestre, a close friend of Prost. McLaren appealed, but Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile rejected the evidence, saying that Senna's history justified the penalty. In addition, the Brazilian was fined $100,000 and given a 6-month suspension. In response to this, he said the following:
They treated me as a criminal.
And revenge followed a year later. Senna arrived at Suzuka in 1990 with a 9-point lead and only needed Prost not to win. He qualified first, but Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile once again forced him to start from the dirty side. But Senna had made up his mind from the start. He wasn't going to let them steal a world title from him again. Prost got a better start, but Senna crashed into him at the first corner without braking. Both were out, giving Ayrton his second world title. And after denying it for a whole year, at the end of 1991, he publicly confessed that the crash was deliberate. Another of his most controversial moments happened in 1993 during the Japanese Grand Prix. Eddie Irvine, a rookie, aggressively unlapped himself, as I mentioned earlier. a situation that the Brazilian found disrespectful and unnecessary. Hours later, he went to the Jordan motorhome and argued with Irvine after the rookie said he didn't need permission to race. Senna lost patience and punched him. The incident was reported. Senna had to testify before the authorities and received a 2-race suspension, which was replaced by a 6-month conditional sanction. Ayrton Senna was an idol for an entire country and a 3-time world champion. But he was also involved in scandals, betrayals, and assaults. And although his talent was unquestionable, his legacy continues to divide opinions to this day. He was a 7-time world champion and also considered one of the dirtiest drivers in Formula One. Michael Schumacher not only won with talent, he also did so with cheating, controversies, and scandals that marked his career. In 1994, his team Benetton was accused of using illegal traction control software that gave him a clear advantage over the rest. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile couldn't prove it, but they did find them guilty of using a modified fuel valve that allowed refueling. A 12.5 seconds faster than their rivals, but the car wasn't the only problem. In Silverstone, that same year, Schumacher made an overtake on the formation lap, which is forbidden, and when he was shown the black flag, he decided to ignore it for 5 laps. The consequence was a 2-race suspension, but that was nothing compared to what would come next. In that year's final championship race, he finished first, just 1 point ahead of Diamond Hill. Schumacher led the race until lap 36 when he went off track, hit the wall, and damaged his car. When Hill saw this, he tried to overtake, but Schumacher deliberately crashed into him at the next corner. Both retired, and the German won his first world championship. A dirty move, but an effective one. So much so that 3 years later, he tried it again. In 1997 in Jerez, he arrived tied in points with Jacques Villeneuve on lap 48. The Canadian tried to overtake, and Schumacher used the same tactic, crashing into him to take him out, but this time he failed. The Ferrari was destroyed, and Schumacher had to retire. Villeneuve, despite the crash, kept going and finished third, securing the world championship. The tactic was so blatant that the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile disqualified him from the entire championship, not just the race. Schumacher didn't lose his victories, but in the official records, his name doesn't even appear as runner-up. A few years later, he took his aggressions off the track. In the 1998 Belgian Grand Prix, he was leading in the rain and fighting for the title against Mika Hakkinen, David Coulthard's teammate. When trying to lap the Scotsman, Coulthard suddenly slowed down. The German didn't see him and crashed into him at over 200 kilometers per hour. The Ferrari was destroyed. Schumacher, furious, got out of the car and went straight to the McLaren garage to confront Coulthard. He tried to start a fight, but the mechanics stopped him. However, his worst conflicts were not with his rivals, but within his own team. In 1999, Eddie Irvine was competing for the Drivers' Championship for Ferrari while Schumacher was recovering from injury. Rather than helping, he and Jan Todt withheld full technical support. Schumacher didn't want another driver to win the title with his team, even if that meant Ferrari would lose another championship. And with Rubens Barrichello, submission was complete in Austria in 2002. The Brazilian was comfortably leading, but in the last corner, by team orders, he slowed down to let Schumacher pass. The blunder was historic, and Ferrari was fined $1 million. The podium was so embarrassing that even Schumacher himself didn't know where to stand. If we're discussing dirty moves, Schumacher's in Monaco 2006 was one of the worst. He was battling Fernando Alonso for pole position. The Spaniard was in second place, but he was on a fast lap, and everything indicated that if he completed it, he would end up ahead of Schumacher. As Alonso neared the end of his fast lap, the German lost control and blocked the track with his car. The yellow flag ruined the times of everyone who was still on a lap. His excuse was that he had made a mistake, but if everything stayed that way, Schumacher would keep first position. The Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile didn't believe him and sent him to the back of the grid. Michael Schumacher was one of the most successful drivers in history, but also one of the most dishonest that Formula One has ever had. And before going to the last place, if you've made it this far, you're probably enjoying the video, so subscribe. Subscribe. He was a world champion, the biggest playboy in the paddock, And the most controversial here, known for sleeping with 5,000 women. James Hunt was many things, but discreet was not one of them. Early on, he was nicknamed Hunt the Shunt because of his tendency to crash. Though his talent was undeniable, his lifestyle made him a legend. He had a ritual that even surprised his mechanics: having sex before qualifying sessions or races. He said it helped him relax. He was often seen smoking at work, even in the team uniform. In 1976, the year he became world champion, he pushed his habits to the extreme before the showdown in Japan against Niki Lauda. Hunt went through a sexual marathon in Tokyo with dozens of women and was later caught by the mechanics having sex in the McLaren garage. He won the title, and if that wasn't enough, he celebrated it with a photo shoot, surrounded by 2 completely naked women. The images, published by a British magazine, were censored in several countries. But for him, it was just another example of his philosophy: living without limits. But it wasn't all parties. Sometimes his temper got the best of him. At the 1977 Canadian Grand Prix, he had an accident with his teammate Jochen Maas, and when one of the marshals came over to help him, Hunt lost control and punched him. He received a record $2,000 fine and an additional penalty for returning to the pits unsafely. His disregard for emotional attachments was also part of his legend. It was to such an extent that when the actor Richard Burton offered him $1 million to divorce his wife Susie Miller without making any trouble, Hunt accepted. In addition to being a womanizer, he smoked, drank, and used marijuana habitually and excessively. In 1979, he said his second wife, Sarah Lomax, fled from police in Scotland because he had a lot of weed in the car and wanted to avoid getting caught. After retiring, his style didn't change. As a commentator for the British Broadcasting Corporation, his broadcasts were full of sexist, biting, and politically incorrect remarks.
Mansell is on the inside. He should know it. He's leading and acting like an idiot. He has the mental age of 10 to begin with. All I can say is rubbish.
Many loved him, others not so much. But everyone remembered him, because James Hunt never knew how to go unnoticed either inside or outside a car. But controversy isn't limited to drivers. In 2005, Formula One faced its most embarrassing moment ever. By accident? No, the disaster was the result of absurd bureaucratic decisions, the greed of a racing team, and a catastrophic mistake by a tire supplier. So watch this video and find out what happened in Indianapolis in 2005, which is considered the greatest embarrassment in the history of Formula One.